All right, Marla, thanks so much for being on this podcast. My first question that I have for you is, tell the audience a little bit about yourself and how you started, and we can go from there.
Okay. Hi. So I am a therapist in Nashville, Tennessee. I got started, I studied psychology in my undergraduate, and then I took a little break between graduating college and deciding on my next steps. But I had an idea that I would be pursuing something in mental health, and I had my own experience in therapy during that time that was really impactful for me, and just made me think I want to do this for other people. I want to be a part of other people getting to have this healing and growth and insight. So I went back to school and got my master's in clinical mental health counseling, and have been doing this work for a couple of years now. And this year is when I opened my own practice. So that's a little bit about my background, and I can tell you about the kind of work that I do with people if that's helpful.
Yeah, if you could talk a little bit about your experience in therapy, what was that like?
Yeah. So I work in private practice in outpatient therapy. So people come to me maybe, once a week, every other week, a couple times a month. And the things that I typically work with people on are things related to how they feel about themselves and how they, I guess, see the world, their kind of core beliefs. So that might have something to do with past experiences that they've had. I typically talk a lot about early childhood family dynamics, those kind of attachment related experiences. But I feel like with every person I work with, what it kind of boils down to is like, how do you interpret the things that have happened to you? What meaning do you make out of the relationships you've had, the experiences you've had, and how does that end up and affect the choices that you make and the behaviors that you have? Like, how do we kind of respond to that and then almost keep that cycle going by you know, acting out of that place. I also work with people on things like grief and trauma. I work with people who have chronic illness. So those are some areas that I'm passionate about. And I take kind of a depth approach. So I'm always looking for like what's underneath, where's the root of this? Are there things that we're doing subconsciously that we're not even aware of? Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah.
Mhm.
So what made you want to dive into those populations, the family
Mhm.
dynamics and also the grief and trauma aspect of it?
Yeah. Um, I I think I have experienced a little bit of my own aspects of all of those things. I think typically there's a saying that who you become is like what you wish you would have had, or you're kind of filling a role that would have been helpful for you. I had some experiences between my undergraduate and going to grad school, where I was experiencing health issues and did not know what was causing that, and that led to a lot of anxiety for me and kind of grief in coming to terms with that, and ended up in was diagnosed with I have Crohn's disease. So I have a chronic illness that I manage, and had just some like medical trauma and grief around that. And I believe that our early relationships kind of form how we interact with the world. So that's kind of how all those pieces came together. But um, yeah,
Hmm. And you said you take a depth approach. Explain that to me.
yeah. So I am always trying to understand, when someone comes to me and they're talking about maybe a problem that they have or something that they would like to change. I'm curious, like, what has that been doing for them so far? So if someone maybe has a behavior that they're like, I don't know why I am doing this. I want to help them understand what has that what has that been doing for you? It's been functional in some way. We don't typically do things for no reason. And trying to help them understand like how did it develop? Is there something from their past that is contributing to this or developed this belief that is connected. So I say depth because I'm really trying to understand the roots of something instead of, okay, well, we'll just do this to change that behavior or to we'll just tell you, hey, that belief isn't true. I'm really trying to find where did that start.
Hmm. Where does this depth approach come from?
Yeah, well, there's lots of different depth related therapy modalities. There's one called depth psychology or depth oriented brief therapy. So it's a depth approach, but in kind of a shorter frame of time. I use EMDR, which is a type of trauma therapy that is also kind of helping form these connections and trying to trace things back. I also use a type of therapy called schema therapy that I think has a really good blend of an attachment basis and kind of looking at how we develop beliefs based off of our interactions with people and life experiences. So there's a lot of different types of therapy that have a depth approach, but those are some that I use.
Hmm. You mentioned a minute ago, you mentioned that you suffer from Crohn's disease. I know that we've talked
Mhm,
about, depth approach quite a lot. So do you
mhm.
use depth approach when in your own personal life or?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yes, I am often thinking about, when I'm noticing something in myself, what could this be connected to, or why am I having this reaction? Why does this particular thing feel so significant or upsetting? So I would say I have always been a pretty reflective person and have tried to understand myself, especially in that season of having a lot of anxiety and a lot of unknowns. So, yeah, it is something that I.
Uh-huh. Yeah. So you got a little cut off there, but I could hear your point
Okay.
very clearly.
Yeah.
What I'm wondering is, given that we've talked about, depth therapy and sort of your own experience with that, how do you translate that to when you're working with other clients who are going through the same struggles they have gone through?
Yeah. So, how do I translate that when I'm working with someone who's gone
Exactly.
through something I've gone through, or just with what they're going through?
Yeah, given that we've talked about your experiences with Crohn's disease
Hmm.
and your work with and the understanding of depth work, how do
Hmm.
you use that with other clients, when they're struggling going through the same
Hmm.
things?
Yeah. So, that's a good question because I do work with people who also suffer from chronic illness. And even if it's not the same, there are definitely things that I can relate to. I try, though, not to apply my experience to other people because I know it can be so different. So I think there's a balance that I try to find where I might, because I've experienced something similar, I think I can empathize in a different way, or I might be able to look out for certain things that they could be experiencing. Like, I know that when I was on my path to getting diagnosed, I had a lot of heightened anxiety. So that's something I'm going to kind of watch for if I'm working with someone who's also going through that experience. But I try to uh, not assume that everyone is going to feel how I felt because we're all different. And I guess that kind of lends itself to your question about depth that I try to understand this particular person sitting in front of me, what have they gone through that is, affecting how they're feeling now and how they're experiencing what they're going through now. They have a different upbringing, they have different life experiences. All of that impacts kind of how we are walking through life. So I try to really understand, again, like I said, kind of what all is going into this. And I try to help them make connections and understand, things that might be unconscious to them. Like, okay, because I'm so anxious about this, I'm now trying to control things in this area of my life. Trying to help them understand things that they might be doing without realizing it. So just essentially gaining more insight.
Mm-hmm. But because what I was gonna ask is, I know like
Hmm.
in terms of like between, therapist and client, there has to be some sort of relatability and connection. The reason why I ask
Hmm.
that is because I've had mental health therapy myself, and before,
Hmm.
I've had a therapist, who didn't really get, my understanding, of what I was going through
Hmm.
as a person with a disability. Fast
Hmm.
forward a few years later, I connect with this other therapist of mine. She she also tends to be neurodivergent, and so we were able
Hmm.
to connect in that way. So like,
Yeah.
how important is relatability between therapist and client? Because you said
Yeah.
you don't tend to apply your own life to when working with others, but like, how
Hmm.
important is it?
Yeah, no, I totally get what you're saying. I think that is such a good point that in the therapeutic relationship, rapport is really important to feel, um, a sense of safety and connection, and also to feel like this person who you're sharing everything with can actually understand you and see where you're coming from. And so there are times that I will share a little bit more. My clients know that I have a chronic illness. Um, Number one, for scheduling purposes, because I am lenient with rescheduling due to illness because I know how that feels. So I will be flexible with them. So they are all aware of it for that reason. But my people that also experience chronic illness, they know that I am coming from the perspective of managing my own chronic illness and working on my mental health through that process. So I do think that that's helpful for them, to know that I can relate in some way, even if I haven't struggled with the exact same thing or it manifested differently. Um, so I do like to show that I have experience with it, but I also hold the room that their experience could be very different from mine. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Okay,
Hmm.
so what have you learned in doing this kind of work and working with patients, who are going through
Hmm.
like a chronic disease or like some other
Hmm.
issues?
Yeah, I think people who are experiencing chronic illness or a disability of some sort, are some of the strongest people that I've ever met. I have lots of people who, are going through a relatively on the outside, like normal, so to speak, life that they work and they have friendships and family relationships and they do all these things, and other people can't quite tell how much they're doing to be there, like how difficult it is for them to show up despite being in pain or constantly being nauseous or whatever it is that they're going through. So working with this population, um, I've seen a lot of resilience. I think some of the issues that I've noticed being in common is that there is this feeling of being out of control, like your body, none of us can really decide what health we have beyond a certain point of like we can try to eat well and exercise and things like that. But you can't decide, I want to be born into a body that has this illness or this condition. It's just how it is. You're just dealt the body that you're dealt. And so I think there is people struggle with feeling out of control. And I think it can be hard to feel like your body is on a different page than you. Like, I want to do these things, but my body won't let me, you know?
Hmm.
So that's something I've noticed.
Yeah, I get the point that you're saying because there's a book called Disabled and Pretty by Rebecca Taussig. If you don't
Mm,
know, she's a disability advocate, writer, and I
hmm
recently read her book and she talked about how she thought about, oh, I want to be like this person one day. I want to have legs. I want to walk, but there are all these sorts of
hmm
barriers that I have to leap
hmm
and jump through that prevent me
Yeah.
from doing the things that I'm doing. So that's kind of what I took away
hmm
from that.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Another thing is I have noticed with the people I work with who have some sort of chronic illness, some sort of condition that they're dealing with every day, is that those people can be very good at masking what they're feeling. They I think, have to downplay their pain a lot of the time or symptoms that they're experiencing because otherwise they'd be talking about it all the time because it's always there. And so I've noticed that those people are also pretty good at hiding what they're dealing with emotionally and mentally. And for them, it might be they have to intentionally choose to be more open and to show, oh, I'm feeling really hurt or I'm like really grieving this particular thing. It can be really easy for them to push it down because they're used to having to just fight through a lot of pain. So I think it's almost like they have this really great threshold for pain and discomfort, all of these things that it makes it easier to ignore their emotions. Um, so that's also something I've noticed.
Yeah, because I was gonna ask like why them asking because I remember I saw a commercial where
Hmm
there were these individuals and they would have like these stick fit these like little face
hmm
drawings and they would cover it like on their face to show
Uh-huh.
that they're not being that they're not going through something. So like why them
Yeah.
asking?
Yeah. I think I don't know if it's just particular to like our culture, but I feel like in at least in the US, there's this feeling that other people don't want to know what you're really going through unless it's I'm doing well, I'm happy and my work is going good. There's this hesitation for people to be honest that I'm really struggling. And I don't know if it comes from maybe not wanting to be vulnerable or just not believing that other people want to hear that. But um and I think with the people I'm talking about who have experienced like chronic pain, chronic illness, um they seem to feel that other people get really tired of hearing about that. That saying, "Oh, I'm in pain today," it would just be they're saying it all the time because it's their reality. And so it creates this masking. And so they get used to kind of masking that. And then they might also mask emotions. I've heard from some people that when they are experiencing all of this pain and these chronic issues, that sometimes it feels like there's no room for them to have emotional difficulties,
Mhm.
like as if they're taking up too much space with their health. So those are some reasons, but I think it's probably different for every person.
Yeah, I'm sure. Is there anything
Mhm.
that you'd like to learn in terms of something new as a clinician?
Yeah, I would say right now I am trying to learn more about a kind of subset of people that are the phrase is like over controlled. So there are some people who we would say are like less controlled. Maybe they're more impulsive. They express their emotions really easily. And I'm trying to learn about people who are more controlled to the point of maybe being rigid or um, unexpressive. They might have trouble relating to people and forming relationships because they could come off kind of cold or detached. And there's some overlap where people who are over controlled, there's a large percentage of them that also experience chronic pain. So I'm interested in learning more about how to help people who are so over controlled let go of some of that control. Um, so that's an area that I'm currently exploring.
Mm-hmm. Who was that sort of mentor that you looked up to that you were like, I want to be like this person when I have my own practice or do my own things as a therapist?
Yes. Yeah, so I would say that person would be my old supervisor. Her name is Alex, and I found her just through a Facebook page when I needed to find a supervisor after I graduated. Because in my state, you do several years of supervised work, and then you're fully independently licensed and you can just work on your own. So that's where I am now. So she was my supervisor, and um, she specializes in perinatal mental health, so kind of mental health around pregnancy and postpartum, but also does a lot of trauma work, like with first responders and veterans, people who have been through really traumatic events. And she really empowered me to figure out what kind of therapist I wanted to be and how my personality and who I am as a person could be beneficial in the therapy room. And she helped remind me that I am not going to know everything because that is something I struggle with is I want to know everything. I want to help everyone I can.
Mhm.
And that I'm a human first and a therapist second. So I have to take care of myself. So yeah, she would be that person that I'm like, oh, I would love to be her when I grow up someday.
Yeah. Lastly,
Mhm.
how can other people, do what you're doing? How can they sort of take the next steps to
Mhm.
become, what you're basically doing now as a mental health professional?
Yeah. So I think the first thing I would recommend is to have your own experience with therapy if you haven't yet, because that's what I needed to decide, yes, this is something that I want to do. There are some really great books out there that you could read as well. So there's a book called The Gift of Therapy by Irvin Yalom, and he is a kind of founder in the field of therapy. And then a book called On Being a Therapist by Carl Rogers, that is also about like what it is to be a therapist. So I think those two books could be helpful, but then taking some steps and researching what kind of program you'd like to do, because I think at least in the US, depends state by state on the specific requirements, but you do have to have a master's degree of some sort, and then go through the licensure process. But there are also lots of other ways to be involved in mental health help, like being a peer support person. And that's, I think, a certificate process or going through the steps to be a like victims advocate or volunteer at a domestic violence shelter or a nonprofit. There's lots of ways that you can get involved.
Mm-hmm. All right. Okay.